Oh man, the boss is such a prick. What? What's going on, man? Oh, he's right behind me, isn't he? One of the funniest things a game dev team ever did was ride the line between life and death, aka insolvency, for years. Not only producing incredibly detailed and captivating action games stitched with pure love, and that's precious. That is precious. But also creating an entire catalog of weirdo strategy games that made everyone say, "What? Huh?" Vanillaware is a perennial quality presentation institution. As a studio of mostly visual artists, they understand that packaging is key to purchases, hence Grimgrimoire. Grand Knight's History, a game that never reached the States because of budget fumbles. 13 Sentinels, a total departure from anything they've ever done, and so profoundly spoilerific that even a 1-inch dive will ruin the story for new players, rendering it broadly unreviewable. And Unicorn Overlord, playing at Ogre Battle in 2024. This is the funniest possible lineup of games a team could produce. It does not logically track. It's like the exact opposite of sticking to the bit and doing what works. And that's how you know they're good. Or something like that, I don't know. That doesn't sound very strategic of them, I hear you say. I thought these were mostly strategy and tactics games. Kamitani needs to hop on Sun Tzu. But you forget, the most terrifying opponent is the one who walks up and shoryukens every single time. Become Vanillaware. Become ungovernable. They're a team you can bet on. Every game here is at least successful from a design perspective and worth your time. But most people will never give the first two a chance, and on the flip side, the final pair are on track to be some of the company's most successful releases. There's a lot to cover, from finances to internal design lineages. Don't worry, I'm a stratagem expert, and I've mapped out a course to navigate these murky waters. Y'all just lay back. I covered most of Vanillaware's abridged history in the previous video to get at the meaty bits quicker. Thanks for coming out to watch a video about Princess Crown of 2024. Reasons to live, right? The only piece of overhead knowledge necessary for this video is the director I propped up so hard. George Kamitani did not direct all of these games. He specifically directed Grimgrimoire and 13 Sentinels Aegis Rim. And so, for a newcomer running the gauntlet, Grand Knight's History and even Unicorn Overlord can feel like a bit of a departure, especially regarding story. If you played his action RPG catalog, you can see the directors of these outliers lightly compromising their specific vision to more accurately match the studio's identity, which is already so wrapped up in Kamitani's artistic ethos, they're kind of inextricable at this point. The food in Unicorn Overlord, the way every woman in Grand Knight's History could knock you out with a swing. Still, it's a point of pride for the studio, I think, to have other employees direct their own projects, giving talent a chance to grow. I think it's part of what makes Vanillaware and their catalog compelling. Work after work of financially dangerous projects, risks, gambles. This is a team willing to bet on their own success. Not everyone can aspire to that kind of creative bravado, and especially in the games industry. But one man, powerful, let's say, enough to base Princess Crown's original concept on Princess Maker 2, is here! So, I have to sell Grimgrimoire. Oh, Grimgrimoire!
I got any of that Grimgrimoire.
4 factions, fast-paced RTS gameplay.
Plus, there's a little art book where the characters are having sex.
Greatness is just a play away.
Your head looks like a torch. What are we gonna do about this? Grimgrimoire is a quaint little PS2 RTS from 2007. It's technically the first Vanillaware game to hit store shelves, but Odin Sphere was actually finished a full year prior in 2006. So what happened? Atlus withheld Odin Sphere from a 2006 launch window to prevent it from interfering with other releases. As always, blame the money people. According to George Kamitani, the setting is effectively lifted from Atelier Marie, the alchemist in Salzburg, but took aesthetic inspiration from the West as well, with Harry Potter. We are truly stuck with this series, aren't we? Oh my god, even the localization. They're all named after alcohol in the original game, hence Gameldrask, like Gameldansk. Now Gameldor, Dumbledore! Who is he sleeping with, George? It's a pretty unpopular game, never really catching a broader fan base, and even struggling in its own Vanillaware microcosm. It just doesn't present as a load of fun. But what you may not know is that Grimgrimoire is Vanillaware's StarCraft. Kamatani liked fantasy and settled on a fantastical StarCraft-like, maintaining familiar abilities and even nods to StarCraft terms. Psychic Storm, etc. The influences are clear. What's less clear is the confidence. Grimgrimoire presents an obvious question. Why would anyone play this? At least that's the gamer gut reaction. I didn't want to touch the thing. I thought it'd be weird and painful. But Grimgrimoire is surprisingly easy to meander through, and especially in the early stages. It's worth mentioning that I'm on the Nintendo Switch Remaster, Grimgrimoire Once More, home to a plethora of gameplay enhancements which absolutely affected the run. The original version was criticized for, quote, clunky controls and slow, repetitive play, but Once More smooths over the entire experience in a way that thoroughly improves the run. It's how most players today will experience the game, like Odin Sphere Leaf Thrazier, so I'll be using it as the backbone here. The flat RTS is a strange concept. Other RTS games look flat too, but they still account for 3D space, even back in Age of Empires 1. Look at that trebuchet go! Yo! Bro's pixelated stone is approximating 3D space, let's go! But Grimgrimoire is unlike any RTS I've ever played, will ever play, in all likelihood. You go through all the same motions, but battles are mostly vertical. Units don't occupy a world, and instead sit on the various floors of the tower, interspersed with stairwells, meaning vertical movement is throttled with choke points. Oh yeah, what people really liked about StarCraft was the ladders. Warcraft 3, huge on ladder play. Oh wait, actually that does make a neat point of comparison. Not every RTS game has freeform movement. You're usually hampered in some small way. In Warcraft 3's case, it was the obscenely chunky everything, making unit pathing a skill in itself. They are the original heckin' chonkers! By comparison, Grimgrimoire feels about as papery as the aesthetics. Units will neatly filter up and down in a line to change floors. This ends up warping play in ways regular RTS titles never do. It means AoE turrets are more lethal. Any AoE attack, really. Not that every unit is bound to stairs. Plenty fly around and float through zones with impunity. And while the title is simpler than basically any other RTS, including the palpably consoleized Halo Wars, it's still unique in the genre. It means instead of units dicking around trying to figure out where to go, they line up and do combat. The numbers are more at the forefront than 3D micromanagement. Grimgrimoire may be an RTS, but it's also the story of Lilith Blonde, a young witch who enrolls in classes at the Silver Star, an ancient magical school, on account of the Tower of Babel. You encounter a full faculty and student body of idiots, navigate their relationships, all while unraveling a mystery over the course of 5 in-game weeks.
I'll promise you again. I'll give you as much as you want.
Whoa. Don't let me oversell the thing. It might look like a visual novel in terms of presentation, but the player's ability to engage is firmly rooted in the strategy play. You end up watching a lot of PNGs talking, but mercifully the characters are varied, dramatic, and engaging enough to watch. I don't want to rag on the voice acting. I think it's pretty good, even if this devil guy is obviously Yosuke Hanamura.
We can fly as fast as any falling star, or seduce any virgins with our charm.
God. It's like if Yosuke was himself. The actual game on offer is immediately understandable to any RTS enjoyer, but looks a little confusing at first glance. If you've somehow never played Peak Fiction, the RTS genre tends to feature a home base, gatherers of some kind, resources scattered along the map, and creeping economic and mechanical progression balanced with resource-hungry combat units to attack settlements or defend against incursions. It's a fairly engaging genre, you know, looking for that next-level Korean APM. They're the kinds of games that demand the player remain active for whole matches. Grimgrimoire isn't any different, really, it's just flat. Thankfully, you're fed a pretty comprehensive, slow-drip tutorial. You'll be equipped to handle anything that looks challenging within an hour or two. For example, sometimes there is danger, but if you have cat, there is no danger, and etc. Like any other RTS, you have a home base analog that you must protect, which produces worker units who gather materials to help grow your army. Eventually, you trace different magic circles, basically buildings, barracks, whatever, that produce stronger units to help you close out any given match. You upgrade your magic circles to upgrade the units that popped out of them, turning the research facet of the genre into a simple one-button solution. For newcomers to the genre and anyone whose interest is piqued, Grimgrimoire's got you. It's gonna wipe your ass. It's gonna tuck you in, with a little bedtime story and a forehead kiss. real quick, how do you feel about immersive video? The game was actually designed for RTS newcomers. In one interview, Kamitani mentions that while his team was really into StarCraft, the premier hardcore multiplayer RTS experience, the genre wasn't nearly as popular in Japan as it was in the US at the time, which had design ramifications.
The only issue was the difficulty level. The majority of gamers in Japan had never played an RTS before, so Nippon Ichi asked us to lower the difficulty setting. We had to change the easy mode to normal and normal to hard. We also added a sweet level, which was even easier than the easy mode.
It's not a surprising move. While I've played hundreds of games and appreciate well-textured experiences more nowadays, Vanillaware was still a young developer making a risky play in a risky market. No matter how you slice it, game dev is usually sell or die. Kamitani went through plenty of personal failure before this point, and even accounting for the presumably unprepared Japanese market, Grimgrimoire was still a flop. We can argue that Kamitani should have just unleashed his full vision, but it's easier to sympathize. Without proof of company worth, aka sales numbers, the vision was never in the budget. What's interesting is the modern remaster, Grimgrimoire Once More, the version I played. Despite the game's poor original sales run, presumably attributable to the watered-down nature of the play and releasing almost concurrently with Odin Sphere, Once More further streamlines play, rendering it profoundly playable. Yeah, profoundly so. How about that Some of the changes include basic quality of life alterations, a fast-forward option mercifully paving over excruciating lulls in the play, which are basically endemic to RTS titles in general, waiting for a unit to finish training or for a building to erect. Controls have been overhauled for smoother, easier engagement, specifically regarding the player's ability to manipulate groups of units and jump between targets, and the changes are even more extensive. Once More allows players to earn coins and slot them into skill trees to unlock buffs for various units, which are generally locked behind upgrading those magic circles. They're not just free, okay, but they take your army's power beyond the original limits delineated by the vanilla version. Some skills are boring, small percentage increases on attack speed and missile count, that sort of thing, but you can also construct multiple power units or unlock utilities that enhance how some units function. It's a welcome addition, especially paired alongside overhauled difficulty options, rewarding players for engaging. Though it is pretty funny to watch game industry opinions haver Vanillaware be like, here's a skill tree.
Really, bro? Skill trees? What's next? Turret segments?
The only addition that really sticks out as a potential selling point is the Grand Magic system, basically allowing the player an incredibly powerful utility spell once per match, or twice with a skill tree upgrade. It doesn't sound like a lot, one little animation and a mechanical effect, but Grimgrimoire is fundamentally altered with this simple addition. You can heal all units in a targeted area, turning the tide of any one battle. You can blast a cluster of enemies with an enormous fireball, in case you need damage on demand. One of the weirder options allows the player to turn the clock back a number of minutes, which I thought would be stupid, but I managed to make use of the thing late game, saving me a reset for a careless mistake. It's a small thing, but it's kind of like a stark red cherry topping your picture-perfect vanilla ice cream. I don't even want to ruin that thing. It can just sit on my shelf. I think that's like half of Vanillaware fans. Grimgrimoire is gorgeous. It may diverge massively from the studio's first game, Odin Sphere, in terms of functional presentation, but it manages to package its art admirably. Where Odin Sphere was an action game that kept the protagonist center stage and used those models for cutscenes, Grimgrimoire is a very different kind of Vanillaware brilliance. Gameplay takes place in the tower seen in the intro. It may never meaningfully change, but the main thing is the units. They are the play, so while it's frustrating having to see the same backdrop ad nauseum, it also means your brain blurs it out and focuses on the bright, distinctly colored little guys running around. Oh, and these shrieking abominations. Why the demon turret cheeked up? When you design a weapon in a game, you want to make the deadly part prominent for visibility. She gonna fart out her ass? Do a little ass blast? You jork! Grimgrimoire presents its story in something like visual novel style, though it's worth noting that even something this basic looking was at one point considered groundbreaking for 2D, or at least impressive. An early dev interview illustrates as much.
It's always hard with these old interviews, Is this just a fluff piece? How much exactly can I throw?
Look at how the characters animate, how they shift poses without hard cuts. Vanillaware is known for pushing 2D presentation on hardware that was moving on long before their first game. They used a special kind of rigging that allowed multiple joints to animate together, and for Grimgrimoire made use of techniques nobody else was bothering with. These things seem so natural, especially looking back retroactively, that it's easy to ignore the artistic accomplishments layering these games. The way multiple disciplines intersect with game dev and how much goes into making a well-presented experience. It's worth noting that even George Kamitani himself thinks 3D looks arguably better or works better to blow minds, but acknowledges as well that 2D graphics make for striking silhouettes and powerful, engaging backgrounds. It's a trade-off. Both have unique merits, Plenty of dudes had no trouble jerking to this, but what makes Vanillaware unique is taking Kamitani and the team's other visual artist skills to the video game space, making something like playable manga, not playable anime, a visual style that refuses to acknowledge the need for the player to realistically delve into their fictional worlds and rather engage with what's presented specifically. On that note, Grimgrimoire features music composed by Hitoshi Sakamoto and his team at Base Escape, like every other major Vanillaware project. I can comment more on music later. Grimgrimoire's music works to set the tone with sufficiently whimsical notes punctuating the decorative pomp of an ancient magical school, inviting adventure, possibility in a world yet to be discovered. Great. One of the key Vanillaware features I love to highlight, especially as a YouTuber in the thick of it, being alive, paying bills, making things, is their perpetual poverty. Vanillaware has operated under existential duress since the very first game. Since before then, flashback to Princess Crown, a game that sold so poorly the studio gets canned. Kamitani starts another dev team, Pluggle, which most people aren't even aware of, before forming Vanillaware. Upon finishing Odin Sphere, he's told it won't hit shelves for a year because Atlas won't let it compete with their other titles, and he's forced to launch Grimgrimoire alongside, or 1 month after, Odin Sphere, having blasted through a 6-month dev cycle, all while tapping into loans to survive. Sakamoto of Final Fantasy Tactics, Valkyria Chronicles, just general gaming composer prolifery, which is not a word, but I write my own destiny, took money out to personally fund Vanillaware. This goes back to Kamitani's early career, actually. They were friendly colleagues, and Sakamoto invited that burden because he believed in the guy.
Base Escape's Sakimoto-san prepared first-class music for us, who couldn't afford to pay for it at the time, and said Kamiya-san shouldn't leave the industry at this point, and gave us a considerable amount of money. He also lent us the development funds. That's how Vanillaware didn't disappear before it even hit the market.
Vanillaware may never be a truly successful studio, financially anyway. They will very likely always ride the make or die line until they eventually dissolve, and part of that is the scope of their projects, the lack of general worldwide consumer interest, and the incredible pittance of funding they receive otherwise. But they continue to make great works for a microcosm of the broader gaming market, and I respect that. They are the ultimate example of art intersecting with capital, the brutal reality that this market, this entire paradigm, is hampered by publisher interests and market data, the belief that you can manufacture success with focus testing, the reality that you aren't allowed to use money to make art without promising something incredible, that people need to get paid to eat. This sounds obvious, but increasingly as a YouTube video jackass, I've come across ideas like, just take all the time to make a project. Don't push yourself. Take half a year to play a game 3 times, write an immaculate script and deliver it, which works for some people. Generally, people making about $8,000 USD on Patreon monthly, if we're being honest, because all production of all art, no matter how small, intersects with capital. You can't free art from the framework and context of the society it exists within. Every artist still buys food and deposits money into a bank, etc. Works with products sold within that society. I like to think that's part of what Oscar Wilde meant when he said all art is quite useless. It's not that art has no purpose, that's not what he meant. Doubly so for games with didactic purpose, right? Being played, passing time. And the original intent of that phrase is presumably that art should exist for its own sake. At least that's how the scholars tell it. I like to think that he also meant all art is fundamentally extraneous to general life, but that art is also happiness, that it's another level of joy beyond the base needs, and its existence, regardless of how it comes about, is fundamental to transcending the base human experience, finding something deeper. Luge Peach, this menacing ghost lady, is interesting for terrorizing Lilith and turning her lover into a staff. Sure, cool. You get off however you like. But in particular because she crossed over to Soul Nomad and the World Eaters in a collaboratory gesture from NIS, Nippon Ichi Software. At least that's the intent, I guess. What really sucks is that Grimgrimoire wouldn't have gotten off the ground financially without help from NIS. She's more of a sign that Vanillaware wasn't in control of their own IP. In fact, NIS still owns the IP to this day, ensuring no sequels can manifest without some kind of dealing. I want to say something pithy like, alack, alay, the price of creation, but really, genuinely, this is the price of engaging with the market. Sometimes you just get fooled. Grimgrimoire, like any other RTS, features multiple factions, or in this case, schools of magic. You have access to glamour, necromancy, alchemy, and sorcery. Green, blue, yellow, red. Getting preschool up in here. Aesthetically, it's a triumph. It feels legitimately cool and empowering to have access to every given faction at all times. Think about Warcraft 3 or StarCraft. You pick one of the playable factions, and that choice defines your gameplay experience. If you play Undead, you have cheap ghouls that get slammed by most other infantry, but your Gatherer unit can passively create buildings via perpetual summoning. Your ghouls harvest wood, freeing up resources that orcs would, for example, use to rush peons to get busy constructing and gathering en masse. While Lilith has no definite identity, the way an RTS player takes pride in their chosen faction and their breadth of skill, you also get authorship over Lilith. You get to express yourself through your chosen method of play. You don't just main a faction, you're encouraged to master every school of magic. It's an entirely different flavor of RTS, and one that has obvious issues for both player investment and retention, but it's also unique to the genre. Once more only added to this sort of player expression with the skill trees, allowing players to sink points into all of them, but critically capable of leaning into any particular one first, most. These different schools of magic have unique pros and cons. Glamour plays in a fairly basic way, immediately accessible, but it's also weaker on the top end without significant investment and micromanagement. Every school has access to a power unit, morning stars, dragons, chimeras, and Karens. Ignoring necromancy, because that's a whole thing. Glamour is made to manually reload their ranged power units. The benefits outweigh the frustration. These phantoms carried the entire game for me once I tapped in, but there's no guarantee every player comes to that conclusion. It's just as easy to play sorcery and rush dragons, or pick alchemy and mass chimeras. Maybe you like the fairies and focused on upgrading them via the skill tree. Like other RTS games, Grimgrimoire is basically rock, paper, scissors, so the game's actually pretty lenient if you're willing to engage with it at that level. Or you can just bulldoze everything like a big dumb YouTuber, ramrod the solution like your boy. I do think Grimgrimoire instantly invites criticism with a simple comparison of available units in any given school of magic when stacked against, any faction from any major RTS. Grimgrimoire was created in 6 months, an incredibly lean dev cycle for PS2, and it shows. Every mission occurs in the same space, every battle is set against the same basic backgrounds. Yeah, the context of every engagement is different, but the solutions are often brute forcible. And I know because I did. This is all to say that Grimgrimoire doesn't have much meat on its bones. Of course, you're granted access to every school of magic. Lilith's a student learning these spells, but more importantly, you can't ask a player to pick this and call it sufficiently depthy RTS gameplay. You can't limit a player to this for 30 minutes at a time without some truly intricate play and varied mission objectives. Once more, partially fixes the potential for boredom with the speed-up option, allowing players to zoom through missions, but when laid out plain and bare, Grimgrimoire struggles to truly capture players, meaningfully get them invested. And that's fine. It's a story game. You play it once, you're done. You're not meant to sink your whole life into this like every other online game. This weakness stems from Vanillaware's strengths. 2D assets are significantly more time-consuming to create. At least that's my understanding. And so you find that Vanillaware makes extensive, economical use of assets. We love the innovation poverty brings. Y'all should have seen my spam rice bowl. There's another future where Vanillaware had more time and money, put out 4 full factions with actual nuance and a deep play experience. Online play! There's another timeline where Vanillaware was forced to cut one of the existing magic schools, say alchemy, and put that dev time into making 3 more robust schools. Regardless, the initial design intention was a simplified, welcoming experience for a market otherwise unprepared for StarCraft in 2D. So the result is bare minimum acceptable, even intelligent. I think a lot of love for the genre is communicated here regardless of relative depth. Units do things like units do in StarCraft. The team clearly took inspiration or outright lifted concepts and worked with what they could to deliver in the final product. All of this rumination because they couldn't just copy another game. Part of what players love about the RTS genre is that specialization in a single civ or race or what. I didn't pick orcs to play with griffins, okay? I picked orcs to make Ooga and Booga kill men. So while Grimgrimoire is unique, you're never actually fighting an equally matched opponent with equal access to options like you. It turns into more of a numerical, well-managed puzzle than an RTS in that sense. It feels like a bit of a waste interrogating a Vanillaware story, especially in this fairly short RTS, especially in a game devved in 6 months, but let's look at the specs real quick. Lilith Blonde walks into Hogwarts, I guess, and finds herself trapped in a time loop that replays the first week's events 4 additional times before the game wraps. You meet all of the same characters, and again, and the main thing keeping story momentum up is the repeatedly raised stakes. I'll get you out of this jam, but only if you accept my contract, which I'm totally going to collect, by the way, and your soul will contractually belong to me, etc., etc. It's a surprising amount of fun, especially for a story delivered by these morphing PNGs on loop. Kamatani allegedly finished the script in 2 months, which makes sense. The basic premise is easy to work with. Girl walks into magical school, and things fall apart. Take a cue from shonen manga and have a new thing to contend with for each of the weeks, and otherwise sprinkle in extra information and peel back the curtain bit by bit. It's a time travel narrative. If anything gets too sticky, you've already written yourself out of criticism from hardcore critics who will probably just say time travel BS and move on. It's cute. It's clean, and like all of Kamatani's early work, it makes sure a young woman goes out, faces the world, even ends up stronger for it. It's a simple fixation, but one I think is sorely lacking in the industry, even if it came from Kamatani. One last interesting thing. While researching the game, I found out that Grimgrimoire had planned sequels. Like, actually planned out, considered sequels, and that's heartbreaking. In dev interviews, Kamatani mentions that he knew a single-player RTS wasn't really the optimal endpoint for the genre. He wanted people playing the thing online. Further to that, he planned out new directions for the story ahead of time. And when Grimgrimoire died on store shelves, a total commercial disaster, all of that got thrown out. It's doubly heartbreaking because Kamatani still cites Grimgrimoire as one of his favorite stories he ever worked on. We were just talking about how capital intersects with art. While Grimgrimoire isn't my favorite Vanillaware title, not even close, even if they're basically all bangers, some part of me is disappointed that pure creative joy isn't successful on its own. They lined it up to die, launching 1 month after Odin Sphere, but jeez. Maybe Grimgrimoire is just a crappy StarCraft knockoff, stamped flat and devoid of depth. Someone has surely thought that before, and it's hard to blame them. There's a better world where we all have infinite time and funds to do whatever we want, spreading our specific joy in its purest form, but that isn't the world we were born into. Most of us anyway. It's interesting that his pet project, Princess Crown, and its 2 effective expansions, sequels, revisions, whatever you want to call them, also failed to speak to the greatest number of people. Accolades reserved for Dragon's Crown and 13 Sentinels, both games tapping into the creator's love, but not necessarily representative of a truly original concept the way Princess Crown kind of is. Vanillaware has a deeply referential portfolio, something you can safely say about his most original works, but what if I told you more than one kind of unique strategy experience came out of this single studio?
Okay, the party enters the orcish encampment and encounters... Let's see... an ogre! Uh-oh! Oh, I know. Why play all alone? Well, unfortunately, Grand Knight's history was never released in the West, so now I can play all alone in this multiplayer game.
Once upon a time, there was a little project called Grand Knight's History, a game not directed by George Kamatani, but by Vanillaware employee turned handheld project director Tomohiko Deguchi, a man who was contacted by publisher Marvelous Entertainment by chance upon hearing a Vanillaware employee wanted to work with the PSP. Development took about 2 years, but unfortunately Dragon's Crown, which was developed concurrently, ran through the company's budget, leaving no money for Grand Knight's History's English localization, firmly gatekeeping it from a broader market. Grand Knight's History went on to sell well, despite its limited potential audience. It was a concept received so well that Deguchi left Vanillaware entirely to work on a refined version of Grand Knight's History called Grand Kingdom. Can I say it looks like epic battle fantasy? Grand Knight's History is a lot to explain, but the scenario isn't complicated. You control a squad of knights roving a map in search of treasure and battle. You choose your squad's name, scientifically crafted to produce the funniest possible dialogue.
You've made a grave mistake. You're trying to rob idiots.
And enter into the service of one of 3 nations: Honor Place, Power Place, and Green Place. Hey, cool. You squad up with a quirky and cute, chaotic, chonky girl failure and uncover a deep and engaging story over the course of several campaign missions. Yes? The story isn't deep or engaging, but it's a what? Then what are we doing here? I have to make a point here and now before anyone thinks I can't perceive art. I was hooked immediately by Grand Knight's History, regardless of its fluffy scenario, because the aesthetic was killer. And hey, I'm a huge customization nerd, and I'm sorry, you're asking me to create my own squad of knights? I can choose their classes, their clothes, their hair. Oh, boy! I was charmed by this book-like aesthetic, the incredibly detailed, whimsical backgrounds and flashy animations. I thought the game was headed straight for my top 100, but the actual run is pretty, labored, let's say. Here, let me give you the tutorial. Too bad you're getting it anyway! Most of the game happens in the field. You set out from town with a limited number of total steps per journey, a fresh party of 4, and a quaint little board to explore. It's relaxing, the type of game that's perfect for a quick adventure on a commute or a lunch break, after work. But your kid won't stop screaming, and the demons are there. Occasionally you pick up major quests or side objectives, but the actual play involves a lot of random encounters. You'll be stopped by an enemy piece and forced into combat with goblins in a forest. Or maybe you're halfway to your objective and you stumble across a merchant caravan with good deals on rare wares. Grand Knight's History is a solid, quick-bite, tabletop RPG solo play simulator, cutting right to the appeal of the genre. Having a team of known factors, you built them after all, and adventuring, reacting to things as they happen, experiencing life, being charmed by the whimsy of the dice. Drink the red goo? Okay! I guess I shouldn't have drank the red goo. On my first quest, I chose the Evil Empire because I thought it would be funnier, and traveled the map trying to remember my step counter, getting into trouble and barely pulling through, only to find myself one single solitary step short from finishing the mission. So I turned off the game, re-rolled, picked the Green Kingdom this time, and stuck with that choice for the rest of the game. Like any newish, complex experience, trial runs help. Or like, just play it correctly and don't be stupid. One step! It's hard to call Grand Knight's History anything less than stunning. The storybook aesthetic, the intricate sprite work, the perfectly painted woodlands. It's a visual feast, enough to carry the game well past where it might otherwise bore players. You might assume a Vanillaware handheld game would have less total conceptual work done, but the available concept art online paints such a vivid picture of a cool, combat-focused world at war. The upper bodies of the leaders engorged like warrior apes. And like in other places also, dear God, not every designed class made it to the final game. There are no ninjas, and I can't say I remember any musketeer-like designs, but the original plan, as always, was likely much more ambitious. Even the combat backdrops are detailed here. Wow! And they're not just backgrounds. You're occasionally thrust into dusty or misty zones with these little post-processing effects, and thick foliage can partially obscure vision. These light touches of verisimilitude make the abstracted board game spaces more real.
I had a hard time deciding on the direction of the visuals, so we went through a lot of trial and error to differentiate ourselves from existing Vanillaware titles, and to inherit the essence of the great predecessors of the Western-styled fantasy RPG of the past. The direction of the work was decided to be drawn using lines and soft colors. A yellowed map is spread out, pieces are moved on it, and when events occur, a background image is inserted, and the characters drawn from line drawings come to life on paper like hand-drawn animation. direction.
It's nerdy, but the level of detail is exactly what you'd expect from Vanillaware, the kind of stuff that makes you smile and nod. We've done it again, boys. The soundtrack is once again a work of bass escape, and like Grimgrimoire, it's suitably horny, full of horns you see, and hits the notes you'd expect. It drifts from whimsical wandering to clashing steel, though it's got the same issue as Final Fantasy, where a fight with a slime is dignified to the same degree as a fight with murderous cutthroats, and that's just a limitation of the budget, I'm guessing. Many such cases. It's unfortunate that you're limited to one city, and that your chosen city is limited to a little backdrop. The world, the things worth seeing, truly are out in the field, and that's exactly where you want to be for a game selling adventure on the overworld, but it's also extremely limiting. Odin Sphere, Muramasa, even Dragon's Crown feel more genuinely lived in by virtue of having full spaces to traverse, little things like bathing in Muramasa, beating the tar out of villagers in Dragon's Crown, but losing the full action framework limits the world to pure abstraction, not unlike Grimgrimoire. You're made to imagine what the world is like in the brief illustrations, the outlines, the sketches you're presented with only whiffs of the world's physical presence, foliage and fog, etc., and that's expected for a PSP strategy game. I just think it's not playing to Vanillaware's greatest strengths. That said, Grand Knight's history is still doing something Vanillaware has always done. In attempting to create a new kind of strategy game, the team effectively dabbled in historical tabletop development with video game elements. It's steeped in the broader history of Dungeons & Dragons, random encounters, character classes, parties, goblins, and dragons. It's another recreation of history spun in a specific way to appear unique in the medium. Everyone's used generic units in a tactics game, units without a story presence, a la Final Fantasy Tactics, Disgaea, and here, that's the whole of the play. You are what you make, whatever weird, sopping, doe-eyed chibi dips you make. And it's part of why the story is so thin. With only a nameless player character, a series of created soldiers, and a single team mascot or whatever she's supposed to be, only a handful of possible through lines can exist. It's why the plot revolves around her and her backstory and whoever your liege is. It's using the history and basic concept of D&D and various other tabletop games and effectively writing the player out of the story, depersonalizing it, which is arguably the death of D&D, but also distinctly not D&D, and so original. The Consequence is a game that relies on its nerdy mechanical minutiae and online play features to endear its players. It arguably has to be min-maxy and masterable to justify its worth. And that's pretty goddamn weird for Vanillaware, a studio whose lovingly handcrafted worlds invite players in to engage beyond what the characters and presented environments can reasonably sustain. I mean, you don't eat food in this game. Same with Grimgrimoire, but guys, work with me here. It's worth mentioning the available job classes and how team composition works, especially because that's what the game cares about above anything else. As a quick note for anyone interested, you don't need to make a good team to survive. You can easily roll through lower level quests and story missions for a healthy length of time without needing to understand anything deeper about the mechanics. Just pick your favorites and have fun. Play dolls, live a little. Squad creation is simple on paper and partially in practice. Pick any 4 dudes from among 3 major classes, doll them up however you like, pick a body type which acts something like a subclass for stat purposes, hand them the weapon you'd like them to start with, which determines what abilities they'll be able to use, and slot them up with skills they learn from weapons. Once they're leveled up enough, they can be sent off to the online mode that I can't access, so really, I'm sending them off to the eternal drifting ever after. Have fun! You can also dress them up with different gear as you acquire it over the course of the game. I hate how it covers up the features you chose or makes them look stupid. I hate the headgear, but I also want stats and abilities, so I guess I'm wearing the hat. I appreciate the class system. It's just crunchy enough to make theorizing and strategizing enjoyable. Also, getting different body types among core classes is helpful. A knight may be a melee-focused unit, but from the core class choice you can branch out into frontline defender, attacker, back row damage dealer, and so on. They give these subclasses names. A knight with superior vitality and HP is a guardian. A knight with superior strength and tech scores is a paladin, which in this case actually means they're a DPS character rather than what you'd expect. Even still, these subclass choices don't impact skill selection. A guardian may synergize with one type better, but for example, I replaced the more well-rounded sword and shield for a rapier with its high single target damage skills. In this way, weapons are more relevant to functional performance than body type, subclass, etc.
You know what they say, you are what you swing. How was that? Was that good?
You can train away deficiencies, so it's ultimately best to like what you like more than fish for max stats. Doesn't like fruit? The gifts of the earth grow full and plenty, and you don't like fruit? Weapon relevance is especially notable with archers and mages. You find that most mages can access healing magic of some kind, but different weapons gate access to the strongest spells of any kind, so you need to work to improve your skill with a weapon type to use higher level skills. While you're never locked into any particular build path, you're incentivized to specialize. I found myself regretting not taking a gun at one point because while the bow has good damage, it also lacks some of the utility of the gun. No class is a must pick, they all have unique abilities that make them uniquely useful in combat. Some happen to cover each other's weak points better in a squad, and that's the real thing you're looking for when you make your second actual squad, once you understand the game. I've seen other players make use of double mage, single knight, and archer setups to get through the game. I just did what I wanted and tried to brute force success. It's a tough game by the end, and to roll credits, you're going to need to make a team that can handle any situation, grid-wise, damage type-wise, and survive. Like, yes, you can min-max your tech and strength scores and pick the right weapon and skill loadout and train them flawlessly with infinite resets, and really all of that time could be better spent filling out job applications. Grey Knight's history is probably a significantly more enjoyable game with online features, played how it was meant to be played, in small, sane chunks. A part of its systemic minutia isn't worth tapping into nowadays or even available via emulator, so anyone playing today for curiosity's sake is in for a pretty long slog. It doesn't pan out exactly how you'd expect either. To roll credits, you're expected to make a team, adventure through the game, complete as many quests as you can, granting you as many training permits as possible, stockpile them, learn the base game while you're at it so you can more thoroughly understand the purpose of team builds, of the worth of different classes and their roles, of positioning units differently on the battlefield, etc., and eventually send off your original team to battle online, which is now pure formality because online play is non-existent. It's basically just retirement, at least via emulator, then start over again, making a new, better team with your well-founded ideas about how to efficiently punch through the game, blow all of your training permits, making super soldiers, and pray you manage to put the final boss down. It's a bit of a strained experience, having to throw away what you worked with for hours. Your dudes realizing they're just not very good and desperately trying to correct it on the next run. Training is hilarious as well because while you earn permits from quests, extremely slowly on that note, these aren't easy to get. Each quest requiring running all over the map, encountering all of the same things you've seen 100 times by that point, and when you finally get to training and blowing all those permits, you've got a pretty good chance to fail or have partial failures. So on PSP, you have to reload ad nauseum until your team isn't garbage anymore. And don't say players won't do this. We all know someone who restarted their Pokemon save 800 times to get a shiny legendary. So after you've restarted or save stated 100 times, you're finally ready to kick the game's ass. But hold up. You like seeing all the whimsy and mystery of the map sucked out for the remaining 20 hours? Grey Knight's history is, like all Vanillaware games, repetitious, but here, the initial joy of the cut-in erodes with every hour spent. This is not an action game with complex inputs. You cannot be surprised by the 25th hour. In a game that's banking on random encounters to keep players engaged, you're going to plot out the perfect route to whatever destination and encounter the same monster you fought 200 times, encounter the same randomized nonsense you've mashed through 10 times per or more, and arrive at the quest's endpoint only to batter down something you fought 2 to 5 times already. It's agony, dude. The game deserves better than this.
I say that now, but Pokemon is still a franchise.
Compound all of that with the sad reality that your squad of knights is only capable of what few things those knights are capable of, the same 4 moves basically all run, and that you can't concurrently level a few squads together. You can see why I argue this game is purely for the min-max crowd. It's sad because the game was crafted with the idea of bringing everyone together, which I love. I thought the same about Pokemon, just as a concept, when I was 7. That is such a pure, good, and naive idea, because the game doesn't allow everyone to come together or play together. You could, for a finite period of time, contribute knights online to grow a digital faction's power and were unable to assist in any way but powerful knight builds, meaning there was no room for support players, resource gatherers, people abdicating that kind of min-max pressure, really anything beyond mechanical min-max behavior. Like, really? You're going to war exclusively with the people who studied the blade? I hate to tell you, but the cringe 9-to-5ers actually carry the economy. You gotta start fantasticizing supply lines, bro. Oh, I just found the inn for cooking in Grand Knight's history. There's an argument that Grand Knight's history would have been served better with a significantly shorter campaign, but you get the sense they wanted to make the purchase worth it. It's a new kind of strategy game and novel in its breadth of customization, but novelty can only carry so much. And it's worthwhile to step back and appreciate its aesthetic triumphs. It's why I led with the visuals over the nerdier stuff. There is good in this game. It's probably worth taking for a whirl if you're in the mood for something new and interesting, especially for a few quick hours. I can't recommend a full run. I don't think it ever actually pays off, but you can see the nascent version of a project that became something bigger later. The most disappointing element of Grand Knight's history is the story. I know. I hear you. Stop expecting big multiplayer games to have worthwhile stories, but I'm playing in 2024 and I'm playing it solo. There has to be something of worth, and they made a point of designing a campaign, designing an adventure. Regardless of modern Vanillaware fans who've grown porcine on the delightful mound that is 13 Sentinels, Vanillaware games have never stood out in terms of writing. Odin Sphere is a bit exceptional for juggling multiple characters with fairly decent narrative mechanical cohesion. Grimgrimoire is at least interesting enough to carry its runtime. Sure, but Vanillaware is not in the business of writing the greatest stories ever told in games. I'd be shocked if they did, with such minimal funding and such a strapped staff. But Grand Knight's history is exceptional in the lineage of Vanillaware games for doing almost nothing, saying almost nothing. Let me qualify that real quick. You enlist with a kingdom, stumble across a sidekick, Leisha, who helpfully exists in the place of the nameless, faceless player, and the primary quest ends up being a MacGuffin hunt. Nothing offensive, FFT did that too, but here it's about stumbling across a location, doing some monster killing or bandit killing, and finding a treasure, MacGuffin located. No staging, no framing, minimal narrative. Partway through, your quest is directly impeded by a masked knight, and later by a witch with ill intentions, and later by a bishop. All pretty standard encounters. You fight the church in FFT as well. Only in Grand Knight's history, there is no rich firmament of character, no true pathos assigned to any of these cutouts. They aren't characters, they're merely JPEGs. It doesn't mean anything for the player to have conflict with this bishop because it's broadly covered up in universe and there is no meaningful commentary about the church here as in FFT. I think what it means to tap into war, like as a concept, to tell a story. Other genre classics have been fluffy, but those games tend to be carried by other things. Advance Wars with its chess-like mechanical focus and, being a Nintendo game. Fire Emblem with its fixation on the humanity of the units you deploy. And the more incisive war stories found in Vandal Hearts, Front Mission, FFT, basically anything by Matsuno on that note, all make a point of highlighting the ills of society, the nature of power, etc. Actually interrogate human conflict, and tend to be intensely character-driven and dramatic. Grand Knight's history story hits with about the weight of Advance Wars, but in a game from a studio that's handled fairly serious subject matter before. It feels needlessly limp. You cross paths with the leaders of both of the nations you didn't side with. That's right, on your quest to acquire magical artifacts that would presumably aid your specific nation, you find the leaders of both respective nations on the battlefield, and while you end up saving them from death at the hands of whatever given monster, you're never given the chance to attack said leaders, and they don't attack you either. They just smile, say, "Thanks, you're a great knight," and hand you the artifact before leaving. I understand that these characters have to live for the sake of the online framework, but what in the These nations are at war! They should be fighting every single time! Our band of knights is a known threat! We are literally encroaching on the territory beyond patrolled borders of both of these nations during these quests. We are enemies of the state! I don't often use the phrase, X really pulled me out of the experience. This absolutely pulled me out of the experience. Don't write a war story if you're not going to commit. Just don't. If we're not worth stopping from acquiring magical artifacts that would make us stronger, or even worth stopping from roving your lands and attacking your soldiers, which we do in a world with patrolled borders, regardless of whether we save any lives, we are worth attacking. I can see the king of the honorable kingdom being like, just this once in exchange for my life. But even the might makes right guy goes, heh, You're pretty based, Lamau. Oh my god! Anyway, you kill the evil demon lord and the kingdom is saved. At least it's like really annoying to actually accomplish, not like rolling into the demon king and dropping a max strength critical light magic attack, you know. You gotta work for it here. It's not really a helpful position to dog on young or burgeoning talent. This game has some value, some really compelling play for a certain kind of person. And ultimately the director up and left Vanillaware, found another place to hang his hat and further his concept, meaning it was good enough, strong enough that someone saw something of worth in it and funded the maker. Rand Kingdom has gorgeous visuals? Do you think it has gorgeous visuals? I think it's totally possible that the director will make something stunning in the future, and people should watch his career, because he's clearly onto something. This was a first project. It doesn't speak well on its own to the broader history of Vanillaware, but even Vanillaware doesn't speak to its own history very well. Sometimes they go off the rails, and sometimes that's a recipe for brilliance.
How would I describe 13 Sentinels? Well, I guess it's kind of like I've discerned the ultimate truth about our reality. However, in light of recent events that have shaped the very foundations of our understanding, everything I knew was a lie. But actually, in light of new information coming forward, construct of meaning is an illusion wrapped within a mirage.
But now there is a change in the paradigm!
Yeah, that's pretty much it. 13 Sentinels Aegis Rim. What the f***? As if Vanillaware wasn't the most punished-ass poverty studio in history, dev for this game got slammed by COVID. The Vita version was cancelled, and the game took a full year to release anywhere outside PlayStation consoles. Better than that, the original scope and vision for the project slipped far out of control as development grew more expensive and more complicated. It's an intricate game, like all of their strategy titles, but to a truly astounding degree. I'm not going to summarize the plot events, I don't have time. I don't want to make time. What you need to know is 13 Sentinels is pure magic. Play it if you can. Don't watch a video, just let it wash over you. It is the ultimate lazy afternoon game. 13 Sentinels Aegis Rim sticks out like a boil in the Vanillaware lineup. It's one of the only games not fixated on swords, or fantasy for that matter. In fact, it's stuck squarely in the creator's past. George Kamitani grew up in the era initially presented in-game, 1980s Japan. You're thrust into a moment in time. Super Mario Bros., manga that looked like this. You can see where George gets it from. It's a world that the devs admit is going for a Shenmue-style vibe, capturing a specific place and time.
And critically, hinging on the adolescent experience.
Main characters are around 16 years old, just before they become members of society. This is the time when you suddenly have to face the constraints of society. The society they face is an ugly world created by dirty adults, but they have no choice but to participate. I also think that adolescence is a struggle where you think, I don't want that. That moment is suffocating and difficult to live in, but it's something that all generations of boys and girls have gone through, and you're not alone in it.
That era was arguably the golden age of mecha anime. It was inundated with magical girl shoujo manga. These cultural tropes and features permeate the game world, adorn characters' rooms, dominate their interests, or are otherwise made manifest in-game. It's something like a sim, something like a visual novel, and completely removed from any of Vanillaware's other work. But above anything else, 13 Sentinels is love made manifest. 13 Sentinels is as its title suggests, 13 Sentinels asks the player to step into the shoes of 13 different characters. Why 13? Because the game was spawned in 2013. There it is! Straight from the horse's mouth! You say no. When your director balloons the number of playable characters for a completely arbitrary reason, burning through the budget, you say no! You'll explore the lives of these characters, unlocking more as you go along, uncovering new information and encountering new twists until... Damn it. God damn it! Eventually, you'll find your progress hampered until you run the combat portion. Oh. Good. I'm half kidding. Combat is still integral to the game and is allegedly built on the bones of what Grimgrimoire, or its planned sequels, were intending to do. Though the final product here doesn't meaningfully resemble Grimgrimoire in any sense, minus the streets that act vaguely like the stairwell choke points. I don't even know my own city streets. Throw me a bone here, George. The particulars of the Grimgrimoire connection are kind of hazy here. While the actual play doesn't resemble Grimgrimoire in any meaningful way, the combat could be seen as vaguely comparable. Maybe, but Kamitani himself said the play is effectively full of repurposed concepts from that planned set of sequels.
The basis for 13 Sentinels Defense Zone is Grimgrimoire, which we created in the past. When Grimgrimoire was planned, it was planned to consist of an adventure part and an RTS part. I didn't have the time, so the adventure part became just an event.
What I didn't consider was the adventure aspect. It's completely possible that Grimgrimoire was to, at one point, feature an actual school the player could explore, attending classes and talking to characters a la Persona, or even unravel another time-based or alternate timeline mystery in that space, much like how players advance the plot of 13 Sentinels. Maybe it wasn't the combat at all, but the general framework that was lifted and repurposed. It's a more plausible explanation, and a real shame because Grimgrimoire is eternally hampered by its incredibly limited 6 months of dev time base self. And 13 Sentinels got the full budget, a whole lot of the budget, and now it's a modern classic, so we know the concept was good. The moral of the story? Don't plan ahead when someone else has the purse strings. You pilot mechs against swarms of invading robots, accessing guns, missiles, turrets, even fists. And since every fight is capped at 2 real-time minutes, though you pause aggressively through each battle, inflating the actual runtime of any given fight, they feel incredibly swift, vital. They capture the energy necessary to make strategy play palatable for a broad audience without curtailing depth. It's a worthwhile experience, and I recommend it to anyone, even someone who doesn't think it'll be any fun, so long as they play knowing as little as possible. I don't need to spoil things. The game's called 13 Sentinels. The front cover's right there. You know mechs are involved, you know some of the kids are wearing dated clothing and others have earbuds. These clues should tell you enough without giving the game away. Otherwise, I'm going to gradually ramp up the spoilers in this review because it's unavoidable. Proceed with caution. And if I get any messages about how I spoiled the game, I'll kill you! There's a handful of games that are best played once. It's not that knowing the twists and turns completely ruins the experience per se. I like drinking coffee every morning and it's not old yet. It's that you can't erase those memories.
You get me, right? There's always something we're better off not knowing. Just go to someone's Twitter account.
There's a magical period of time, first playing 13 Sentinels, where your head bursts with the same thought clouds the characters have, taking wild stabs at the game's next twist, guessing at every mystery that lazily rolls along the idyllic pastel nostalgia-scape. Those moments of profound uncertainty, closely tracing the truth but never quite grasping it exactly, are the power of 13 Sentinels, not to diminish its combat aspect or even its own secrets menu. Yeah, they put 3 modes of play front and center on startup, equally dignified adventuring, fighting, and reading. That's a ballsy play, Mr. K. It's Vanillaware's most ambitious story, and you'll be hooked for a good long while. It possesses you, occupies your thoughts for those original hours. I was looking up the wiki pages of these characters during play. I never do that. And it forces you through the combat segments to get back to the goddamn adventure already. It's not a question of good or bad, it's how brilliant, why brilliant, and can we bottle this? Can I carry this with me somehow? At its core, the game lives in its 2 more engaging facets, adventure and combat. Adventuring, or whatever other word, boils down to walking through delicately arranged dioramas, these immaculately painted backdrops of lived-in spaces, and tapping A sometimes, pulling up thought bubbles and having a think.
Man. What do you think the G-Light, B-Light, Gumai, Kandai guy's up to right now?
It's not a deeply mechanical experience because it doesn't need to be. The simple joy of exploring a facsimile of a place in time is reason to engage enough. It's a flattened, contained version of the reason modern Persona is so powerful. Stepping into another person's life, especially one so familiar but deeply alien to the Western player, or even younger fan for that matter, is to drink greedily from the well of another person's experience. Straight from Kamitani's brain. It's one of gaming's great virtues, contained in frames. You're never locked into your choices, though. It's not that kind of adventure. The game fully expects you to explore one branch of the journey, then restart from a splitting point and try again. Do something different, take a different path, talk to another character, sift through some papers, feed a cat, explore every last option available so by the end you've seen many possible versions of a single person's life lived at your discretion. Sometimes you hit a snag, whether because you're lacking the ability to unlock an optional route route, or because you can't figure out how to trigger an event, but the answers are out there, and generally speaking, it just takes a little sip of tea and a break, and you can get back in game. Basically big chilling, and we respect that. Most of Vanillaware's games aren't. All the action games are active frame one, and these strategy and tactics titles don't usually let you sit for long. Yeah, you can sit on the board in Grand Knight's history, but every misstep is a possibility you won't reach your destination in time. Vanillaware let me lay back at an irresponsible angle and feel alive somewhere else. Conversely, combat is significantly more active. It's a powerful contrast, and clearly a point of the design. Where the days stretch on in the adventure segment, as school days do, encounters give you a brisk 2 minutes to finish or die. 2 minutes is plenty of time on normal mode. Time pauses with each character selection through to execution, so the real challenge is killing efficiently.
That's pretty efficient.
Mech combat is also complex by the end. While it starts simple and admittedly remains simple in terms of execution, enough that a strategy idiot can play this, and especially on easy mode, it's also extremely nerdy. You're given such an incredible degree of customization over mech performance via unlockable moves and stat upgrades that each of your mechs can function completely differently. And there are only 4 kinds of mechs, though each pilot has a special affinity. One long-range mech user might do best at lasers, while another excels at missiles. Those kinds of characteristic differences. It adds flavor to each character, but ultimately the player is given authorship over their squad. Combat ramps up as the game progresses, but early on you're free to mercilessly pummel the enemy into the dirt with multi-target missile storms and big chunky ramming attacks. It's really gratifying at the start, which is important. Making the game overly strict and challenging might shunt players before they really get hooked by the story. They need to work in tandem, both contrasting one another and complementing the totality of the run. It's harder to do than it looks, and letting the player absolutely dominate the first 10 or so battles is a good first step. 13 Sentinels does fumble here slightly. There's a lot of combat to work through, no matter how short each fight seems, and I wouldn't be surprised if a good chunk of the player base lowered the difficulty just to get more of the story. When I maxed out my adventure possibilities, I was forced to head for the door to combat, sadly glancing back at my happy place before getting sucked back into the 3-hour vortex known as strategy segment progress. It's just that compelling, and being interrupted to go play this for 2 to 3 hours at a time just isn't that great of a sell. Do you think I want my book ripped out of my hands at the beach party to go play volleyball? Choke on my bone? Part of the struggle is the presentation. You might have noticed, but very little of the combat looks anything like a Vanillaware game. It's presented as a hyper-simplified, digitized macro view of the city you battle in, and while it's slick, it doesn't have even a sliver of the usual character Vanillaware games are presented with. I think that's part of the issue with the divide. The 2 segments of play feel so thoroughly divorced from one another. Visually, narratively, functionally, you're effectively buying 2 games for the price of one, but you have to engage with both to play the one you really, really want to get to the bottom of. I don't envy any director tasked with making this work, and I describe the game as magical, so I guess they did okay.
Is this Kamatani's way of saying that cozy games are a scam? Get this guy to the indie scene stat. They've got to hear this.
But it is interesting how textured the strategy play is. I chafed a bit by the end, forced to trawl through these endless menus and plug away at each little skill, upgrading them piece by piece and deciding if resources were better spent getting a level 4 punch or a new skill or stat boosts. It's tough, and it makes you wonder why. But after looking over it again, I think I get the idea. Every facet of the adventure was carefully constructed to convincingly render the past. I can't speak to the accuracies of the time period. I did not know this world, but the detail is obvious. The fading sunlight casting warm hues across the classroom, rays revealing the copious dust, the rich kid's room with its CRT television, gaming console, posters, etc. All of this is distilled nostalgia, pining for a simpler time, in theory, made infinitely more complex at the peak of puberty, burgeoning feelings, uncertainty about the future. It captures these human experiences with such a loving brush, and I think that's true of the combat of 13 Sentinels. As someone who still has not watched a single Gundam anime, but has also been exposed to its history passively online through playing all of Armored Core, playing Xenoblade X and Xenogears, I'm starting to pick up on tropes and realities of the genre, what people like about it. And I think 13 Sentinels is as nerdy as it is, with its little upgrade points and skills and tuning mech performance, because that's part of what it means to like mecha. It's probably why people slave away connecting the individual parts of Gunpla models. This is a genre with an incredibly rich history that can be simply understood by outsiders with things like multi-target missiles, leg spikes, Gauss cannons. And these aren't just moves. Ask yourself, does Final Fantasy Tactics, or almost any other genre contemporary, have a pop-up animation listed beside the move when it's selected? Many other games actually maintain combat animations, so admittedly there's no need, but they took the time in this rapid-fire combat framework, stripped of almost all of Vanillaware's visual identity, to animate every single solitary attack any particular mech can make. While that works to remind people, hey, we worked on this, it's not just flat on purpose, it also shows their love for the genre, that they felt compelled to enshrine those attacks in their game. Attacks pulled directly from mecha history told over 4 generations of differing mechs. I don't know much about mecha still, but it's cool seeing someone love something so much right there, like a portal into another world, another set of obsessions. These fascinations with facets of 1985 Japan pervade the characters, their arcs as well. One story plays off magical girl anime tropes, including a talking cat and a magical gun. The first selectable character, Juro Kurabe, is a huge movie nut and spouts off about his love for film frequently. And you kind of key into that obsession you're inhabiting when you get snubbed by some people for talking about it and entreated by others. Characters are free to be goofy. This dude loves hamburger. Gee, I wonder why it's spelled weird. This dude loves yakisoba pan.
With my
yakisoba pan.
They might not have put cooking in the game, but they're all still eating good. Pop idols are displayed on the TV, characters are interested in them, in actors and culture, and all of this is set to a backdrop of 13 young people parsing their daily lives, still coming into their own, latching on to whatever new interesting thing makes them feel normal in this world, falling in love instantly. It's probably the game's most resounding success, the ability to speak truly about the youth experience that love is given freely and frequently until not all but some have it beaten out of them by societal expectations, experience, and the need to perform, the need to grow up, to stop yapping about all that stuff you like so much, watching that other person's eyes glaze over again. The characters feel much more authentic than they really should, given how limited their individual stories actually are, because they collectively speak to a lived experience, fiction scraping at the very real fringes of love. I feel like 13 Sentinels' story could be picked apart for hours. It's highly complex, cross-referential, and so riddled with spoilers that talking about it could ruin the experience. Vanillaware had to make up a series of sheets that delineated where and when events took place to ensure the staff could make sense of the thing. I don't want to talk about the story. I think it's best experienced solo without knowledge, but some things warrant commentary. The first question is where to start. What does become obvious after the first few passes at every character's story, stories are drip-fed more of over time, and some which don't unlock until you've learned hidden truths, is that something is amiss. Something about your idyllic 1980s life is wrong. The aesthetic works to deliver the gut punches and reveals even harder. Wow, this world sure is picturesque, just like how I'd imagined 1985 Japan, filled with all those nostalgic things from the era. Industrialized, sure, but always bathed with those fuzzy lights, painted with those simplistic hues. The world's soft construction, again, even further well delivered by Vanillaware's 2D aesthetic and tightly cropped abstraction of what the total world can be, only what you're allowed to walk into, just about gives away the entire premise. You're left to ask, what exactly is wrong with this place, with these people's lives? And it unfolds day to day, person to person. The story is further complicated with jumps into the past and future. You'll walk into a historical Japan post-bombing and meet surprisingly modern characters who stick out in different ways. Early hints about the nature of the plot include characters speaking in archaic ways or overly familiar tones, effectively skipping the formalities of Japanese speech. If I highlight every character and spoil every story, we'll be here all day. Some characters don't really warrant the time. There are entire character arcs and major plot beats pulled directly out of classic manga, anime. Man, War of the Worlds gets a reference.
Oh here's a reference. Oh here's a reference. Oh here's a reference. Oh here's a reference.
It's like sci-fi soup. George, you can't fit all that in there!
Regardless of the interpersonal drama that pulls every character forward, the major plot reveals itself during both adventure and combat segments. There's no going back after this point, if you're interested, by the way. The world is under attack by kaiju, these horrific machines that never stop spawning, only it turns out they're not exactly human-exterminating death machines, but terraforming equipment, robots designed to make new worlds habitable. For every heart-pounding moment, for every time the characters believed the world was on the brink, it's all rug-pulled by the end. Combat is ultimately contextualized as a video game, one with actual brain-draining consequences, but one designed to test the pilots, these presumably chosen children. The world is revealed to be a construct, multiple constructs, even digitized realities that the characters' consciousnesses are forced to live through and interact with to keep them growing and occupied while in stasis, so that they'll eventually emerge on a new world and repopulate an already largely extinct humankind on a new planet. It's hard to say the reveals actually match the joy of the run. How can an ending ever approach the journey? It's more like an, so that's how it is moment, as all the theories and thoughts dissipate. And that's not tragic as much as it is a necessary dispelling of the magic. Stories have to end eventually, and maybe that's what was so gripping about 13 Sentinels, how it put the big secrets tab right alongside the adventure and combat, how it propped up this quaint diorama world to doze off in. It wraps you up in the mystery until the very end, gets you so invested in the characters, and you're ultimately left to let them get on with their new lives. I've hardly thought about the game since. It's a very Vanillaware thing, like eating food. The end goal is to get full, right, but it's the eating, the savoring of those dancing flavors that makes the yakisoba pan worth the money. Leave it to Kamitani to write a story mimicking that experience.
Unicorn Overlord, named thusly because Fairy Sparkle Kings was simply too masculine. A game built in the shadow of titans, but what will its own legacy be?
Unicorn Overlord is a really interesting story on its own before turning the game on. Its development actually dates back some 10 years prior to its release, with the director, Takafumi Noma, approached to make a strategy game. Early concept art shows how much the concept evolved, at one point featuring muskets, looking cutesier overall than the final product. A project in the works for a decade. That's gotta suck, especially watching the company funds constantly dry up. Shoot, even Unicorn Overlord itself sucked up the last coins in the bank account before launch. It's wild. This company, for all its perceived failings, has never stopped producing what they believe in, even to their own financial detriment. And that's part of what makes them special. Unicorn Overlord has no business existing, and that's its best quality. Imagine the huge, swangin' balls it takes to drop an ogre battle like in 2024. Isn't that illegal per the Geneva Convention? It's one of the most surprising experiences I've walked into in recent years. I could go at length about the thing. I am gonna do that. Calling it an ogre battle-like might raise eyebrows, but to be clear, it is. It's a game featuring squad combat played out on huge sprawling maps, all unfolding in real time while you seek to round out a liberation army and unite 5 continents to topple tyrannical rule in a country called Zenoira. Some liken it to Fire Emblem as well, and for obvious reasons, nobody knows what ogre battle is. Don't tell me I'm wrong in the comment. Don't write in the comments that I'm wrong. Don't remind me how alone I am. But it's not a senseless comparison. You control a prince and you're guided by a grizzled veteran who's already pre-promoted. I assume Unicorn Overlord was in fact tapping into Fire Emblem's Jagan trope, handing the player an immediately strong ally to help carry you along, but who sucks up experience points inefficiently like a big old vacuum. And was so afraid of it, or him dying in the story potentially, that I benched Joseph for the entire game, even though he doesn't function anything like that and you're free to use him at will. Well, you know what they say. Assuming makes an ass out of you and Ming. Say sorry now! Unicorn Overlord starts hot with a queen caught in a political coup. You get to watch these incredible, opulent animations while the player character's mother is savagely beaten to death. What a silly thing that happened. It's a good start, the kind of inciting incident you need to really light a fire in the player's gut. Fast forward a number of years and Prince Elaine, currently in hiding, is training for the day he finally takes the fight to the Empire, which has since expanded its reach across the entire continent. Suddenly an enemy ship lands and you're thrust into combat. Unicorn Overlord does a lot of smart things to get the player invested. Soon after the enemy lands ashore, Elaine's childhood friend Mirabelle is nearly killed, until Elaine valiantly strikes them down. That is probably the most exciting scene in the entire game, and I could not be sadder about it. You regroup, drive back the attackers, and encounter the first boss enemy, Hodrick. But wait a minute, Hudrick isn't acting like he should. He's a known character and he's like a completely different person. Thankfully, after trouncing him in combat, Elaine's magical ring his mother imparted before she went to face her death, the Ring of the Unicorn, is able to dispel the enchantment controlling Hudrick. I have a whole awful lot to say about this, but instead, I'm going to ignore it and let the pain fester. With the few soldiers you have, seemingly out of time to prepare, Elaine vows to topple the Emperor and regain control of the continent in the name of peace and justice and other platitudes K-cool. Unicorn Overlord immediately whips ass and stays serving for a good long run. It's a legitimately enjoyable game to sink hours into, powering up your squads and taking down little micro-encounters in the broader conflict, recapturing territory and uncovering the world's secrets, like flat earth theory and chemtrails. Now it's like you can press the A button to interact sometimes. Across the tutorial and the intro segment, you'll have a pretty good understanding of how things are gonna play out. You roll into any given battle, deploy some squadrons from your flag, order them around the map, and try to accomplish whatever objective before the time limit at the top runs out. Pro tip, don't play the demo and then load up the proper game a month later and totally forget about the timer.
What? Oh my god!
What might trip up new players is the nature of combat. Battles start once opposing units collide, and you gotta live with the result, so you have to be confident in whatever squad you're sending into the bulk of the enemy's army. Now, there's no permadeath here, so yes, Fire Emblem is harder than this. You can get your ass beat and redeploy later. The only real punishment is time loss, especially if your most valuable squad gets KO'd. And even then, even failing the timer, even losing units, you can use an item found in your travels, hallowed corn ash, to reverse the clock, revive units. The rest of the game is about what you'd expect. Capture objectives, try to avoid or bust through environmental hazards, and occasionally tap into consumable items and special powers to make battles easier. Despite its intimidating appearance, it is the single easiest to engage with strategy, tactics type game I've played since FFTA. Even the slurs are softer, jeez. At its core, Unicorn Overlord is fun, flashy, and comes highly recommended. I think it's worth the price tag just to support Vanillaware, but also to experience something you probably won't for a good long while. And it's a full-length tactical RPG, relatively unhindered by its Vanillaware typical asset limitations. It's the kind of game I can't believe I'm playing now, which begs the question, how it came to be.
The market for tile-based SRPGs has been well explored by major developers and historical IPs for decades. What really drew Atlas to Vanillaware's proposal for Unicorn Overlord was how it was a blue ocean opportunity that avoided the red ocean of tile-based SRPGs. We ourselves had played many tactics games in the 16-bit era of the 1990s and were moved by the proposal from Noma-san and Nakanishi-san, which led to the development of this title.
The world is immaculate. I'm in love with the thing. You don't get to explore Vanillaware's worlds. It's one of the weakest aspects of the studio. The fact that 2D demands harsh abstractions to present its own settings, or outright ignores them, leaves them to the theater of the imagination because of the flat theatrical presentation. You know, you're not going to see a character's ass unless Kamatani draws it for you, which is why Aramis is so disappointing. Suddenly, upon entering Unicorn Overlord's overworld, you're treated to wide open spaces you can dig through, actually traverse. The introductory segments, maybe the first 6 hours, are best for this. You're significantly more vulnerable than you are in the late game, with strapped resources and weak team compositions. So walking into contested territory means ducking enemy scouts and patrols. You know, the things Grand Knight's history could never meaningfully replicate because it came down to Monopoly-style game piece evasion. Here, there are stakes. You are at war to some degree. The world is dangerous. You might get jumped by thieves. Or harassed by teleporting mages. It's more engaging than you'd expect, especially being able to break away from where you're expected to be, allowed to dig through these enemy territories at your own discretion to find resources or more battles in case you're not interested in the next story mission. Other little diversions dot the map. These towers that Elaine's best friend Lex is uniquely capable of climbing for treasure, or grave sites an early game cleric will sanctify. It's not this deep, second facet of play, but it's a quality way to decompress after repeat missions, and sometimes exploration is highly rewarding. You won't recruit every party member if you don't scour each area, unlocking each necessary battle or a side quest relevant to said characters. Oh god, she looks like the first miniature I ever painted. Eyes the elven archer! Take her away! When characters have built enough affinity for one another, generally by being partnered up in combat or via food, conversation spots will unlock all over the map like Xenoblade, and you'll have to go hunting for them. While it's annoying when you just can't find a specific one, we live in the internet age, and it's just another excuse to get out into the world, hunting for secrets and resources. Gathering is the initial reason the players made to actually sift through the continent. Towns absolutely litter the map, and since you liberate each one from the yoke of oppression, they tend to need rebuilding. Funneling resources found on the map into towns lets you unlock ports and other small rewards, and it's not necessary, but it's definitely narratively fulfilling. What good would a liberator be if he swept in, killed the current regime, and left the citizens picking up the pieces? Please don't look at United States history right now, please! You're also able to station a guard at towns, which I thought implied that enemies would try to reclaim them, and sadly it's not a feature. Probably something that was planned and cut, but you can gift items to stationed units, or like, leave a guy you hate in the middle of a dusty backwater. I love these little stories we spin ourselves. Yes, I'm granting my finest unit my most scenic overlook, and you get Dirt Town. Unicorn Overlord is a shrieking infestation of minutia on that note. You can eat food in taverns with groups of characters to raise their affinity for one another all at once. Very Vanillaware, very cool. I don't think medieval folk are eating kiwis on this side, but that's really just the consequence of Japanese game devs trying to approximate vaguely European fantasy food. You can buy items and gear from shops and you can grind experience at a series of unlockable grind holes. You can play a mining minigame for resources. You can challenge the arena. My favorite feature is the Idealist's hand mirror. For years, we've suffered the tyranny of being handed a character's color palette without consent. What the f is that? But with this consumable, purchasable from black market shops, you can overwrite the artist's intentions and hashtag fix any character you like. Now that's what I'm talking about! I'm being pithy, but for real, a little color goes a long way. A little personalization, man. Unicorn Overlord is the product of a 10-year dev cycle, stuffed to bursting with things, and it's a double-edged sword from anywhere past hour 10. Speaking of which, let's talk combat and tactics. Like I said, the game's stuffed. There's an endless heap of classes to consider, all with unique quirks that can help enhance squad performance or tank your squad synergy if you don't know what you're doing. You slot whoever you like into your squads and adjust over time as you find things you like and dislike about whoever. All squads have a leader, and every unit has a special leader passive ability, like taking outposts faster. If you're cavalry, you move quick. If you're a griffin rider, somehow your entire squad gets the ability to fly over mountains. And we're not about to start asking questions here. You don't need to really understand the combat to play it. I played through on the second highest difficulty, tactical, with minimal mechanical understanding or investment until about 3/4 of the way through the story, which is a story I can't wait to tell. But for now, know that regardless of ease of access, Unicorn Overlord is a nightmare tangle of systems. When combat starts, you'll see a number of gems on each character relative to their total action points, which can be increased with equipable items. And they'll each unleash innately known class abilities in order of highest initiative score or speed. That's fine on its own. Every game plays like that, but battles can play out very differently based on which characters go first, which skills fire off, whether you miss, and you can manipulate those aspects by delving into the character's individual menus and altering their tactics, making a row thrust attack prioritized over a first aid heal move if two enemies are lined up. Not unlike Dragon Age Origins tactics menu. This gives the player an incredible amount of control over how battles unfold, but it's also totally unnecessary to touch on all but the highest difficulty. And I know because I brute forced combat without bothering with tactics through to the end of my run, except for the arena. So yeah, there's a lot to master, a lot to understand, but never any need to trouble yourself. This is not League of Legends. You can hit gold without learning anything, really. The many classes are well varied, and more depthy than you'd expect. In Fire Emblem, for example, a Myrmidon is gonna do Myrmidon things, okay? Crit someone with a Killing Edge equipped, and otherwise clink off a knight and die on the clapback. Here, every unit is part of a squad and still ends up more interesting by design. Elaine can attack and heal himself on strike, but also guard allies against incoming damage, do an AoE strike when upgraded. This spear-chucking girl can thrust horizontally and heal teammates or perform a ranged throw. Some are mostly only used for specialty purposes. Swordmasters do damage, but specifically do well at first striking down opponents like thieves who otherwise manage to dodge incoming attacks with ease. They can additionally do more damage to other targets. But we like damage, so the arena is sweet. Not only is it the hardest challenge in the game, which you can blast through regardless of tactics for at least 3/4 of the thing, but you eventually have to dig around in menus to actually pull through. It is the only part of the game that demands strategy, and they locked Amalia, aka Peak Fiction, behind it. Sometimes devs are just so smart. I will say, not a fan of throwing a thief in front of her until she misses enough to make me the winner. Not a huge fan of that, but now I have the best character, so I guess good job. You find that squad building, at least for the average human, is more about striking a balance of good damage and utility or defense. Yes, you can get sick with it, and I think it'd probably make for a fun rainy day, nerdily trawling through menus, but it's still broadly ignorable. I kept the fundamental core of my Elaine squad for the entire game. I paired him up with the thief and the warrior and battered down everything early game with dodges, shields, and powerful strikes. And though I replaced the thief with a swordmaster and other upgrades by the end, it wasn't anything special, but carried regardless. The end goal of Unicorn Overlord is to craft insanely broken teams the way you first saw in the intro. A squad of 5 with piles of actions all firing off in sequence, launching the nukes, fight over fight. You start the game with mere squads of 2 and increase the capacity and number over the course of the game as you complete battles, earn renown, and spend it for upgrades. I want to make a point of saying up front that narratively, a lot of what Unicorn Overlord does is successful. You sweep through ravaged villages, liberate them one by one, rebuild them, and with that experience and fame now attracting support for your cause per the narrative, you become physically stronger, capable of even greater feats of bravery and heroism. It's a solid mechanical tie to the narrative. It's perpetually rewarding. Just another few battles and I can increase this squad's capacity. I can get a dragon rider in there. Ah man, one more fight and I can upgrade my swordmaster. It's got a powerful inbuilt hook that incentivizes you through multiple quick bite fights to build up and topple the game's harder and longer story missions. Unicorn Overlord is rewarding to play, always getting another unit, always finding a new item, always something to tweak or plug away at. It's brilliant for taking this otherwise obtuse and textured genre to a place that's constantly tapping the neurons. It is mass appeal by design in a struggling genre, and for Vanillaware's sake, I'm proud of what they accomplished. A lot of words have been written about the difficulty of Unicorn Overlord, with the main accusation being that it's too easy, except on the hardest mode, and the counter being that it doesn't matter, just play the hardest mode. But I want to take another approach here. The difficulty of a game isn't an inherently useful conversation like you might think as a capital G gamer. It's usually impossible to objectively gauge one's own abilities compared to others, and generally unfair to do so if you happen to be a secret savant. You know, who the f*** are you helping telling a grade schooler you can jump further than them? I hope you can. I hope you can, Jeremy. I don't think I'm very good at games. Not even tactics games. I have so much footage of getting blown up in Valkyria Chronicles, bro. But Unicorn Overlord is pretty obviously made easy on purpose. They want people playing it and they want people talking about it. They wouldn't hand you a time-reversing consumable item that also doubles as a resurrection tool and general fail-state negator otherwise. That's a really big deal. It's clear evidence of a complex experience being shaped for a broader market. The first piece of my own anecdotal evidence is the tactical difficulty. I ran this third highest difficulty option after hearing from early reviewers that it was easier than they expected. It was. I like easier games. They make my life better. I do a lot of recording. I don't think it's a problem, generally speaking, for a game to let me play it. Give me a night off. It was easy enough that I totally failed to engage with the equipment, with upgrading my gear meaningfully, and my tactics on that note until I entered the Elflands, about halfway through the game. Except I also played the game wrong. Early on, around level 12, you're allowed to break off from the main region to Drakenhold to do a whole subset of story quests to liberate the region. The problem? I didn't realize I could even enter Drakenhold until I was leveled up enough to enter the Elf region, which is around level 17-18. Drakenhold is around 12-14. So I'd effectively progressed through the bulk of the starting region without actually paying attention to systemic cruft and I was underleveled to boot on the 3rd highest difficulty. Drakkenhold was a region I casually stomped, being casually overleveled for its entire runtime. The question is not, is Unicorn Overlord too easy, but why is Unicorn Overlord so forgiving? And it's pretty easy to see why, just playing the game naturally. You have mountains of things to do. Your attention is constantly pulled away by some task, or the next town to upgrade, or the resources you have to collect, or the bandits chasing you, or the mission that popped up, or that new side quest, and on top of that, it hands you a yarn ball of tactical wank concealed away in a menu so it doesn't overload the player's brain and paint the walls with viscera. Unicorn Overlord has a lot going on. And more than that, combat is exceptionally complex and numerically bizarre. They mention it in a dev interview, stating that a lot of trial and error went into making the game's combat playable.
To be honest, we spent a considerable amount of time on trial and error. However, I think it was worth it, and it turned out to be something worth playing.
And that isn't a joke. Just watch a 5-person combat unfold for a minute here. 5 actions or more per character lob back and forth. Everything changes if a critical hit goes off. Everything about the calculations changes if you move a unit from one tile to another. Check this out. Before any battle starts, you are freely allowed to rearrange your units on the set of allotted squadron tiles, and every single change of position can radically alter the outcome of battles. You can go from outright losing a fight to completely crushing it. You can save a character's life by moving them up or down, left or right, seemingly with no rhyme or reason read numerically. Once battle starts, once all the actions start firing, you can get a clearer picture. Oh, this character dies here in this battle, first if placed in this row, causing this action to never fire because of low initiative, causing endless chain reactions in the many tactical considerations that make up how this complex system unfolds. Unicorn Overlord isn't easy because Lamau the devs think I'm stupid, although there's definitely a small amount of that. Dropping an ogre battle like in the West after 20-some years. Unicorn Overlord is easy because without being as lenient as it is on the player, it'd probably take an in-house mathematician to sort this shit out and make it numerically viable to understand. It would be hell. The game would become incredibly strict. Players would have to engage with the tactics system thoroughly on all 5 to 10 of their squads, wasting hours of time running trial and error yourself to make your teams work at all before even approaching the entire girthy reality of the play, unit after unit combat. There is simply too much going on for that version of the game to be palatable. No shot they're risking 10 years of dev work on a Demento game that flops. But what's left is a game that's best played in short bursts over a very long period of time. Halfway through the game, I was manually skipping every battle except for a handful to get footage. Combat animations are beautiful, truly, but forcing the same set of them with 10 characters on screen constantly performing actions isn't just slow, it's excruciating. Like pulling each of your eyelashes one at a time. Almost unwatchable when you run the thing straight through. So good on them for allowing this skip, honestly. It really is a fascinating system for a mechanics nerd. By the end of the game, I was practically bargaining with the enemy AI for every single battle, maximizing my outcomes by constantly rearranging my units to cheese them. Or if I was doomed to fail, abusing consumable items like stat-altering potions and even bombs to ensure I'd eventually pull through. You're handed so many little outs, so many extra options the enemy doesn't have access to, and that's not unheard of. You're the hero, the player character. You have to do this all the time. There has to be some noted mechanical difference between you and your opponents, a la Dungeons & Dragons. Your quest and your personhood has to matter mechanically for it to matter narratively. But when it turns every combat into this,
listen, you can swap out a current combatant with a nearby ally. Horrible for verisimilitude, incredible for narrative, relying on your friends, your coalition. Turns out that leaves some tension in the design.
I've ignored talking about the abilities you can launch on the map before combat starts, just in your little squads, because they feed into the difficulty paradigm, let's call it. If you want to store up points by killing enemies or popping hallowed corn ashes, you absolutely can chunk down every single boss with big splashy arrow rains and cavalry charges. You can do anything. On one hand, my hand is very held. On the other, I can recommend this strategy game to literally anyone. Unicorn Overlord doesn't know if it wants a hardcore audience or not. It's playing both sides. That's the takeaway. They could have made it harder, realized it probably couldn't be how they imagined without some demented tweaks that'd make the thing highly particular, pass or fail to engage with, and accounted for the length of the game, deciding to leave it fairly open-ended, free-to-player expression. Playable for as many people as possible, and I don't think there's anything wrong with that. Not everyone is going to nickel and dime combat encounters like me. Not everyone is going to abuse items, and some people will still find great joy in the tactics. It's probably not the best look, but from one tactician to another, it's probably the right call. For me, Unicorn Overlord's greatest weakness is nothing to do with the play, but the story. And no, I'm not about to drop a rant like, this character said this, which is such a plot hole, or any of that stupid clickbait non-critique. I'm here to talk about the war story genre and what Unicorn Overlord means to it. It's unfair to make broad sweeping comparisons, even in this small genre, to a point. This is an individual work made under the capital constraints that hobbled it. Unicorn Overlord was not devved by Square Enix's best, or whoever. It was a tight team of artists juggling multiple hats with a primary focus on aesthetics and a secondary focus on almost everything else. Matsuno himself, the man, the myth, the legend, etc., came out on Twitter with the comment defending Unicorn Overlord preemptively, hoping players wouldn't compare it to his own work because he, Yasunori Matsuno, is basically the king of the war story genre, writing powerful political stories that meaningfully interrogate the nature of power and human conflict. He's behind Final Fantasy Tactics, Ogre Battle, and Tactics Ogre. His work speaks for itself and is totally inextricable from the legacy of this genre. That's the problem. I hear you, Matsuno, and I'd say the same thing to anyone watching this video. Don't compare any of my meager successes in video making to some smaller creator struggling to get their foot in the door. It isn't fair to make those kinds of comparisons, to a point. This is still Vanillaware, and they're very much still in the business of resurrecting ancient history for a modern era. Soft serve. The past matters, regardless, and Vanillaware said so. While Noma is a first-time director, he's been wearing that hat for a decade of development and worked on multiple other projects. He is not a nobody. He just happens to be hitting the public eye now. Unicorn Overlord started well enough. The inciting incident is powerful and gets you motivated to take back the kingdom. The initial call to action once the Emperor's forces hit your hiding spot is impactful as well. But the Ring of the Unicorn is a problem. You're immediately presented with a magical item that makes Hodrick amicable again, uncurses him, lazily paves over the nature of human conflict so thoroughly rooted to the genre, to the war story, as to be comical. There are infinite reasons for human conflict. Hodrick needed to fall in line or lose his position in society, which would cost him his family's well-being. Hodrick lost everything in the invasion and now serves as a depressed alcoholic who doesn't care if his past allies live or die because he can barely hold on to his own withering existence, etc., etc. I could keep going. Reducing things to magic isn't just lazy, it's intellectually offensive. So the upshot, okay, the bright side is maybe Unicorn Overlord is shooting for a younger audience, uses its many continents that our young hero liberates to tell a powerful story about unity. Or maybe the ring stops being relevant or changes its nature partway through. And while I'm happy to say that they do lean into the unity thing and the ring does not do exactly what it's presented as initially, the story still manages to fumble all across the board. You meet plenty of micro-tyrants who aren't motivated by the curse, but motivated by their own ideals. Several bandits want money. A petty ruler with a comical food addiction is revealed to actually know the true pain of hunger and hoards food for the eventual good of the people, while all of his dialogue is littered with mentions of food because he's a one-dimensional side character. There are semi-plausible and even decent small war stories contained within Unicorn Overlord. Early on, you're made to rescue Mirabelle from the Emperor, and you can fail that task. The game is willing to occasionally raise the stakes and inflict a consequence on the player. It's just that so many of the little conflicts are completely ridiculous. You fight a local tyrant, except wait, he's actually a great guy. Bring him along. Make him build bridges. You choose to execute a thief and murderer. Hold up, he escaped and he's plotting revenge, only to be rehabilitated by the plot later, so he's recruitable. You fight a series of traitors who get off without even a wrist slap. It is so profoundly toothless, so often. And that's to be expected to a point. They tell you that Elaine can be a hero or tyrant, but ultimately you can axe a couple of criminals or squat up with them like nothing ever happened. Mind you, Those above things are mostly side content, optional battles. The main story missions want to tell a grander, world-spanning tale, so let's look at the actual plot events. You attempt to rescue Annabelle, and whether or not you make it in time, you fail to stop the unsealing of Emperor Galerius' power, who is assisted by this freak Baltro. They piss off from the plot for a good long while, completing their plans while you're forced to march through an entire set of continents, solving every nation's issues, including reinstating the King of Drakenhold and unlocking the true power of the Ring of the Unicorn with assistance from the elves. You're made to marry, like not actually, but hand someone a matching ring to perform the rite of the covenant. So marriage. And I really have to stress that you can marry anyone you want, but Amalia is the best choice. Clarabelle comes up to her vagina plate. There is no other option. And there really is no other option because any attempt to perform the rite of the covenant with a man, even a submissive and breedable one, produces a, well, if you think it's for the best, you've always got my back, bro.
That's bro. Bro.
Always playing it safe, huh? May I remind you that we just came off from 13 Sentinels? Does that ring a bell? Do you remember 13 Sentinels?
Editor me here. Apparently, some of the male ones actually are more explicitly romantic than the ones I encountered. For example, the mage, who wants a lot of compliments. And that may be the most realistic depiction of a relationship I've ever seen in a Vanillaware game.
Also, the Galerius Mind Control Curse is actually a soul supplanting spell, allowing a Zenoiran soul to occupy a host, which I think is great compared to the initial impression the game gives you. Direct manipulation via magic is at least 1 point better than the curse that makes you evil. The big reveal is finding out that Zenoira and its people were obliterated by Galerius killing a holy creature, so all Zenoiran souls are trapped in limbo, and through magic, capable of inhabiting others, so you're made to march up to Galerius, whoop his ass, and end his continent-spanning empire. It doesn't inspire a ton of confidence.
These endings, man. You can get a bad ending for not playing along with the Ring of the Maiden thing, but that's hard to imagine someone doing. The normal ending is pretty limp. Galerius turns out to be capable of hopping into bodies but assuming his own appearance, I guess, which makes it really awkward to find out he's been in your mother's body this whole time. This doesn't really intersect with power politics much, except as a vague metaphor for assuming control through direct spiritual supplanting, once again ducking a more political story and chalking things up to magic. And your partner saves you from the same fate by using the Ring of the Maiden, I guess, because you signed the marriage contract, and that shit is legally binding. I am physically sweating. The final ending, the true ending. Okay, so Baltro was the real puppet master here, controlling the flow of Zenoiran souls, but you see, Elaine finds out and goes, hey, serving this guy? Kinda cringe. And so they side with him instantly and destroy Baltro, but only because the Great Sage or whomsoever Deus Ex Machina's a barrier in to protect you. Like, who even cares at this point? Elaine just asked the souls for help. Gosh, I wish he thought of that earlier. Maybe if he sent them a card or something. They clearly can't see their own work, when they were murdering all of those innocents. What the fuck? All of this culminates in a coronation ceremony that, depending on your choices, can be utterly devoid of character, blindingly solemn, set to barren organ music while power over the land is transferred to a good young man who earned it. Not a single speck of jubilation, celebration. It's the coldest few moments I think I've ever sat through at the end of an otherwise resounding victory. I was staring in genuine awe. Say what you will about Matsuno's stories, but Delita's ending is stuck with me permanently. This is nothing. The disappointment hit especially harder after playing Grand Knight's history and being equally offended by the toothlessness of that war story. There is room for softer work out there, but it's so weird for Vanillaware, a company that historically repainted history with a thoroughly modern brush, tapped directly into Tower of Doom for Dragon's Crown, consistently accessed historical games and art not to make commentary, but to refurbish, and they tend to make convincing recreations, even refinements. Unicorn Overlord
Overlord is a refinement of Ogre Battle and that entire lineage in a sense. It's a version that anyone can play, not just the admittedly few willing to pay attention, but it in no way commentates, recreates, or even approaches the history of that riderly lineage past sheer aesthetic. You can be impressed with the story or cling to your $80 to $100 game as high art. I happen to think the entirety outweighs any personal disappointment I have over something I probably had unrealistic expectations of. But the pedigree! But leaving this entire fantastical world behind on the exact note you expected it to end on. Winning and taking the crown for yourself is the least memorable thing that could have possibly been done. It means, kind of like 13 Sentinels, that the journey was worth more than the eventual payoff, and fair enough.
I don't want to be cynical about Vanillaware, though. You know, when you peel back my little rant here about wanting something and getting something else, we're left with a couple of dev quotes on the story. Specifically that this individual doesn't seem confident in writing any kind of story except for one particular kind from the body of literature of his understanding, and
therefore, this work explores the story of the more than 60 unique characters and their motivations for joining the Liberation Army. It highlights how even the seemingly weak can bring change to the world by raising their voices and working together against tyranny and injustice. To me, that's the real message of this story.
So, regardless of my own selfish wants, that's what happened. An uncomfortable writer telling a cute little story about everyone coming together. It's soft. It's sweet. It's basically vanilla. Vanillaware has always done what they, as a small team of artists, wanted to do, even when it was unsaleable, even when it didn't make sense. And while they've made concessions to broader audiences with key kinds of visual appeal and difficulty options, ensuring a sort of fluidity pervades their gameplay experiences and encompasses many kinds of players, they're still mostly concerned with relics, old genres, the ghosts of ideas past, serving up anything other than the norm, the meta, deliberately presenting their own joy even when it clashes with expectations. And so the real joy of engaging with Vanillaware's work is twofold. The games are solid, fun played straight in a way you wouldn't expect. Like I said before, Muramasa is something everyone should play, and I never thought I'd ever care until I picked the thing up myself. They're also surprisingly detailed, enjoyable from an artistic perspective. The kinds of things you can pore over for hours, obsessing about creative decisions and palette choices, they're artisanal by design. But all of this, these enjoyable splashes of color rendered through so many lines of code, are deeply, thoroughly limited by the capital constraints that defined their development. And that is ultimately the Vanillaware story, continuing to strive for excellence, to spread your joy, even when nobody cares, even when it hurts, because if you don't put paper next to pen, who will? My experiences with Vanillaware's games have shown me just how easy it is for people to fall off of art and enjoyment. It really isn't hard imagining people putting, an hour into Grimgrimoire, a couple hours into Grand Knight's history, and writing them off as 7 out of 10, mid, putting them away and never touching them again. It is extraordinarily easy to stay in your lane, enjoy the things that you know you like, but it's another matter entirely to push past those boundaries and engage with new things. I've been making a point of trying more things in my job and even in regular life experiences. Recently, I went to an ice cream parlor and looked around and I picked out something I would never normally get. A black licorice ice cream, one of the most disgusting flavors of candy I've ever had. But the parlor knows that. And I was shocked that after a while and getting over the initial, black licorice ice cream distaste, I found something that was really good, really palatable. Because someone sat down and made that flavor. And all it took was acquiring the taste. Hey, it's KBash. Huge thanks goes out to my $4 patrons. Check them out. Beautiful. And double special thanks goes to my extra generous patrons who are Adam Welch, Acropolon, all the singularities, Alpha 42, Andrew Redacted, Anthony, Arshwasser, Azriel, Azura, Aaron, Axinate, Bear Skeleton, Basement Dweller, Bosch 7, Ben M, Beguile, Big Papa Spray, Bing Bing Doodoo Oingo Boingo Time, Break Against the Machine, Wargle Hargle, Wasm Dante, Bohop, Boom Dead, BH Operator, Born in Shadow, Brandon S, Brandon Hesse, British Gooch, Cow, Cake Czar, Can I Cuss on Here? C-Dub, Cat Girls Are Real, Caesar Master T,
Chiefy Boy,
Hero Hero,
Cordit,
Chris Bromo,
Cody Golden,
Comfy Moogle, Cookie Bug, Couch MOBA, Crashkers, Crater, Chris BJ, Mono 19D, CW Glassworks, Denny Pango, Danky Steaks, Swaggy David Castillo, Dara, Dash Granny, Decode, Deadward, Dead, The Strega, Dingus Bat, Doodle Flu, Doug Prince, DJ, Professor K, Dr. Cullen PhD, The Protagonist, Elias, Elpio, Elsa, Emperor Pickle, Empty Tenshi, Excalibur Shines, Nar, Fail Knight, Fuzillion, Forte Noir, Fupa Saiyan, Frog Vorbis, Garen Guarantee, Gato Nero, Gigglebite, Glyph Seeker, Nine Cat, Gobo Bobo, Goose 6112, Gray, The Darkest Black, Gucci Plant, Hatsune Miku's Crack House, Archive, Demon, Game and Station, Hermit J, Honey Mutt, Horn Tiger, how do you know? Huey.
I just took 7 grams of magic mushrooms and now I'm lost in the woods.
I'm supporting KBash just because I wanted to make this part of the video longer. Inferno galore. Ingenious Cloud. IOBG. I punched a sandwich.
It's not bad.
It's time to sue.
It's not good.
Ivy Ruth Langley. Jack Hydrick. Jacob. James. Jason Lasky. Jaden. Jay Drito. JL Savarus. Jay Deus. JK Hedgehog. John Bo the Joker. Jordan Joyner. Jorzy Burden. Juicy Frost. Julian My Julian. June. Kai Zeta Slow. KBash's best K. Keegan Too Cool. Keith the Thief. Kata Snap. King Kuma. Keith. Kenite Pike. Clock. K-Noe. Cone 2020. Crated. Crazy Dark Chocolate. Ice. Kyle. Not that kind. KZ Excellent. Lady Weave. Laundry Mom. Lego Sid. Lethal Nibble. Linkle. Little Big Trouble. Loathsome Dung Eater. Low Fat Mogre. Lucas Boy. Blood Mac James. Lunati. Magic Meow. Mama Rollin. Manapool. Manic Pixie Space Pirate. Mara Ganger. Hercules. Marcus Rambles. Maximum Dome. Maple Puppet. Mega Boy E Nasty. Metal Gear Gaseous. Michelle Citrano. Mike DeVere. Mikusagi. Moa.
Bobby Dobby, Big Titty Gop, GF Cooley.
Monochrome Only. Monochrome Rainbow. Morgana Black. Modi. Mr. Yeety Dabface McYoinkbomb. Naira New. Nito Torpedo. Neon Dwarf. Nifty Rex. Not Nobel. Nuggy. Old Burgle. Old Man Cranberry. Omni Nerd Zero. Only LK. The Plant. PBK. Pandemic Cowboy. Pelagic Undulation. PK Gaming. E-Mike. Popular Hitman. Prismatic Dan. Pringle Prongle. Pringle Prongle. Probably not Grady. Project Darklight. Punch Fighter Champion. Ponosaurus Rex. Quasar McDougal. Quillworth. Raging Ataraxia. Real Beans. Reggie Rodriguez. Renteca Bond. Ringed Relay. Roy Londo. RP Gamer. Ryan Michelle. Ryan Maury Brooks. Saigon Man. Salsa. Salty Smasher. Scribe Slendy. Sakai no Award. Sensual Coder. Saphirium. Sexy Bionicle GF. Josh. Nintendo. Shut up, Wesley. Silver Bear 909. Sin. God! Sir Doodles a lot. Sir Newton. Sir Slurps a lot. Skyward League. Sleepy Wabbit. Snart. Small Turtle House. Sozetta Dad. Sock'em Bopper. Suckdolager. Space Lizard. Spider Dad. Squidged. Squishward. Star Night Sky. Storm Strider and the House of Storm. Streffin Battle. Super Dingus. Super Sandwich Guy. Taya Toxin. George Chubbington. Terrence Swift. The Big Bubby. The Clown Prince of Cringe. The Digital Dutchman. The Good Lord has blessed me. Hallelujah. The Green Loki. The Crispy Boy. The Peacemaker Pyro. The Salt Knight. The Nomad. The Real McCoy. Big Dick Mystic. Fresh. Rips Heart. Tiggles McGuffin. Tim Lobster. Timid the Writer. Tony Jones. The Legend. Total Play. Travis Edwards. Whittle Chungus. Ty Guy 9001. Type A Grapefruit. Vid. Vacant Plaza. Valenrid. Venom. Vice Pop. Vic. Joaquin, get right in my bag. Waposa. We are so K-back. Weed Trash. Waylon. Where am I? Help. Widgie. Winter Solstice. Win TV. Wrenchim. Zanny Tanner. Travius. Your boy Flyers. Yayro 12. Yashichi. Yay, Kundo! Your mom, Winky Zachary Lives. Zachary Zanasso. Zane the Impure. Zane the Pure. Zed Slayer Gamer. Zero Salazar. Sylvan Ray. Zenova. Cyberbunk. If you'd like to help support the show, unlock new long-form projects, and help me keep improving, check out my Patreon. We got lots more videos in store. Stay tuned for more. KBash out.